How many people have a smartphone? How many people have a computer? Is there anybody who did not raise their hands? Right, so one of the things that we'll talk about today, cybersecurity, and we'll talk about the supply chain. I want you to walk away with one takeaway today. And I'll circle back on this at the end. Go home and make sure your computers or your smartphones are updated. Make sure that you are in the process, you are in the habit, to go back to one of the earlier speakers, you're in the habit of making sure you're patched and your home machines are looked after. It is really important. So if you take nothing away from anything I say today, except go home and patch your systems, you will have benefited, I think, from the conversation. Okay, here's what I'm going to talk about today. I encourage you to ask questions if you have any, please. I'm starting to lose my hearing, but not too bad. So I should be able to pick those up, and I'll play them back for the audience so we can all hear them and go forward. I find that cybersecurity in general is not a really well understood area, and it's a rapidly moving area. And I think everybody in this room has a deep awareness that supply chain itself is deeply dependent on technology. And if you're deeply dependent on technology, you are absolutely susceptible to cybersecurity attacks. And I'm going to talk through one of them today in a fair amount of depth. But there are dozens, and they happen all the time. And even I suspect many of you, either reading the paper this morning or watching the news, would have seen some kind of cyber event. The big one that happened a few weeks ago, the WannaCry, WCry, it's gotten a variety of different terms, affected more than 200,000 people across the globe, shut down hospitals, and all of that was executed across the entire supply chain for a number of organizations, basically bringing production lines to a halt and a number of other activities. But that's not the one I'm going to talk about today. So I'll cover these topics, and I'm trying to leave some time for questions because please think about any and please fire them up. I'll make up questions if I don't get any so that we have some dialogue. Threats abound. This slide I just basically grabbed. I looked back in the news and I just grabbed some of the major headlines that are showing up. I could have grabbed the one in the elevator that I noticed this morning as I was going up in the elevator. And every single day there is some kind of big event that focuses on cybersecurity. Because I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, those usually translate into executive questions that come down and hit my desk every day. And what it's often about is there's a dramatic shift that started a few years ago and is growing rapidly. And attackers have managed to find a way to make money on cybersecurity. So there's an entire underground community. You've probably heard about the dark net or things like this. There's an entire underground community that exists. Its entire supply chain, from creating an attack, finding a vulnerable person, arranging the services, hiring your staff to do the attack, collecting the funds, setting up a new opportunity. So this is a real economy. It operates every single day, and there are undoubtedly people in this room who are the targets of that activity. So there's a whole dark economy supply chain that exists. And I won't talk about each of these at all, but what you'll find is that the topic itself is becoming quite active because the number of cyber attacks is going up all the time. And they're becoming more impactful as they go forward. I'm going to talk a bit today about a very specific attack that took place against Target in 2013. There must be some people, I would think, in the audience that heard about this. When Target's stock really took a big hit, it happened, there were kind of two events around the same time frame. This was part of them extracting a little bit from Canada, was part of the stock hit. And then this significant attack that Target came through was also part of the hit that their stock took. The analysis post the event has determined that their stock may have sort of recovered, but what is true is that the executives that were impacted, the board members who were impacted, and many of their customers have ultimately not recovered. So it's kind of interesting. So what happened in Target, obviously they have a large number of point of sale systems that they do across North America. And they're all connected so that they can very efficiently move products, right? Sell products, put them on the shelf, stock, do all those activities that companies do that sell. And they have a number of partners that they deal with, and the obvious supply chain partners, sort of those who manufacture products and those that deliver services, are often fairly strong. And I'm going to talk about at the end what things to think about when you think about your partners and your expectations of them. In this case, there was an HVAC vendor who provided a certain level of service for many of their stores who had a weakness in their system. That weakness in the HVAC vendor system, Fazio Mechanical Services, allowed for a gap, because they had connectivity with their systems, which almost every service provider does. They had connectivity to their systems. They were able to use that gap to get into the point of sale systems, ultimately sitting there for a period of time. They were detected by their security operations center. So the attackers were detected. That landed on deaf ears, right? And this is one of the major findings from that attack. Don't ignore the warning signs that you see, and that's equally true in your homes. So what happened was a number of days passed, software ran, collected credit cards, shipped them to those who were able to sell them. You can sell a credit card today. You can sell a credit card number. You can sell identities. These things are marketable today on the dark web, and they're quite easy to find. So if my credit card is compromised, the dollar value is dropping because it's easier to do all the time now. But ultimately, at that point, you were somewhere around $3 to $5 per credit card. And if you just look at, and I've got some numbers later on, but 40 million credit card numbers stolen, you can just picture how much money you're going to be prepared, if you're the attacker, how hard you're going to try and get in to steal that money as long as you can market the credit cards. And at that point, they could market the credit cards. So December 2nd, credit card numbers started flowing out. Security system was detected. The company failed to act. And finally, and you can see the time frames involved here, 2 weeks-ish from sort of, and there was a preparation stage that took place a few weeks before this, and ultimately led to significant breach. And I'll talk about the impacts of it. The third one is kind of significant. So there were some clear and obvious costs that the company had to endure, the $250 million. But really the significant event was the loss in revenue and then the brand impact. And when you try and define what brand impact is associated with a cybersecurity event, there's a lot of different metrics that a company's able to use. One is stock price. Did your stock price drop? Another one is lost customers, and because of the connectivity we have now with credit cards and everything else, you can actually see who stops shopping at an organization. What's also true is kind of that second last bullet, which is 90 lawsuits by customers and banks. And one of those 90 has settled for $10 million, and many are still in the courts. So you start to realize that the long-term impact associated with something that was completely preventable is measured in well over $500 million. For them, by the time they're done, it'll probably be approaching close to $1 billion. For anybody who knows Enbridge, years ago in Marshall, Michigan, we had the largest land oil leak in North America, and it actually changed fundamentally our company. Changed the way we saw safety, changed the way we saw integrity. Well, our cost associated with cleaning that up was $1 billion. So when you equate a cybersecurity event to the largest oil leak in the history of North America on an internal leak, meaning not on the ocean, that's the kind of scale we're talking about that Target sort of came through. And I could have put up 30 examples like this, right? And and I shouldn't say all, but many of them were directly attackable through the supply chain. So I don't want to dwell on this too long, but take it seriously, I guess, is probably one of the big messages. I'll circle back, go home and patch your machines. I'm going to say that a few times. And there was a congressional inquiry, and when I think about Enbridge, we also were part of a congressional inquiry when that happened. That is a horrible thing to come through for any company, any organization, but it also sprayed on to their supply chain partners, reputation, everything else. Okay, I spoke about electronically connected. Every year you're more connected. That's driven by efficiency. So the goals that we have around efficiency, big data, trying to drive analytics, that's another one of the areas I have accountability for. You end up, those goals about efficiency, big data, make smarter decisions, end up driving bigger connectivity. The more connectivity you have, surprisingly enough, the more susceptible you are to cybersecurity attacks. And I believe there's no way around this, and I'll talk about some of the latest trends that we're starting to see as we go along. Fragile, and I'm not sure if happy to talk after this for a few minutes for anybody who wants to talk about the fragility I've seen in the supply chain. But reality is the supply chains are often so efficient and so sort of just-in-time delivery, has been taken to an extreme that if you are able to sever one point in the supply chain, you can disrupt the entire chain for a fairly lengthy period. If you do 2 points or 3 points in a fairly extended chain, the recovery time can be significant. And in the case of Target, it was really the theft of information that really caused all their issues. Just as easily, it could have been somebody with malicious intent who was hired by somebody who's just trying to get back at that company because they were angry. The cost of committing a cybersecurity attack is very low. The impacts of having been attacked is very high, right? So you've actually got economics working against you at this stage, right? So as we talk more about this, we'll talk about some of the ways to protect yourself against this. Attackers, I've talked about financial focus. For us in Enbridge, and I think it's true for many companies when they think about their supply chain, in our case, we absolutely deal with the financial aspect. We worry about ransomware, attackers coming in, encrypting your information. The University of Calgary here locally came through this recently, ended up paying the ransom, and I could give you a bit more information. Is there anybody here from the University of Calgary? No? So you may have more information than I have, but I'm happy to kind of give a little bit of that information if you're interested in it and kind of what happened. But that was a very difficult decision to go forward and pay a ransom. And most people sort of, at their core, are offended that we would consider paying a ransom. Well, in some cases, you truly have no choice. And I think that's what the University of Calgary was faced with. So you start to realize that, a lot of these attacks are financially driven. Ransomware is one of them. Target was more about a steal and sell. And there's others that are effective as well. What we worry about most in Enbridge, and I think that's true for a lot of companies that provide services of any magnitude, we worry about the second one more, which is disruption associated with terrorism. Could be eco-terrorists, could be people that want to work outside the law and prepared to do that because they feel so strongly about some belief system. And ultimately, they have the ability, in our case, to disrupt our supply chain on a scale that could be measured in millions of dollars in minutes and hours. And so we pay a lot of attention to that. Secondly, when you think about terrorism, we move oil, we move natural gas, we take natural gas to homes, and we do solar and wind turbine work. With all of that, if energy is disrupted, when I think about the criticality of a supply chain and you think about protecting yourself against terrorists, if we don't work, energy doesn't get delivered, these lights don't go on, you don't drive home. That's how seriously we take the cybersecurity in our company. What I found with the attackers, we have to protect, in the case of Enbridge, we have 30,000 devices that I try and keep track of to protect. In the case of the attacker, they only have to compromise one to initially get in. And so it really is not just economically a very difficult problem to solve, it's also a very complex problem to solve because of the way things work. The quote that's on the bottom of the slide, when I think about supply chain and what's really happening, if you're a manufacturer, and if you just think about it today, I saw a quote from Justin Trudeau that went back maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and obviously, President Trump is putting pressure on basically all other countries in terms of how they're doing cross-border movements. And Justin Trudeau talked about building a car was really 9 different flows across the borders to be able to finally create an assembled car. Well, what's true is when you think about a computer, and it's kind of interesting when you think about you go to buy a computer, you take it out of the box, you'd like to believe you should trust that computer. You know, it's a product, it's got a warranty on it, and what we found in the case of a very specific company in China was that that was not the case. It came implanted with malware that then started to execute after it was connected to the internet. So you know, the thing to be thoughtful about when I talk about how to prevent these things is that it really is important. And the impacts for those in manufacturing, the impacts can be quite significant on your clients, on your company. In the case of those computers, obviously the company was impacted, but all of their clients were significantly impacted as well. Okay, expectations of partners. So one of the things that we're quite serious about, so we have thousands of partners that we deal with as a company, and every one of those partnerships goes through a process of analysis. And when you think about security, we think about it really in three different flavors. Prevent the attack. If you can't prevent the attack, detect the attack, and then respond accordingly. In the prevention, there's a really important, so has anybody heard of the SOC 2 certification? So that's kind of scary, one person. So SOC 2 is it's a certification that allows you to assess whether the services or the goods that you're buying from a supply chain partner, whether they are operating in a secure way. Had Target forced a strong SOC 2 analysis on the HVAC provider that they had used, almost certainly that situation would have been avoided, right? Fairly simple thing to do, and yet ended up costing them somewhere close to approaching $1 billion, right? And long-term impact on their growth as a company. SOC 2 reports, you can look them up. I'm sure your security staff or even Google will tell you in great length what that is. It is a simple thing that you can take back to your organizations and think carefully about and kind of pose when you're talking to a partner or you're thinking about the supply chain from, you know, the very initial starts all the way to the end. If all of those players are protected, then you're going to be in a reasonably good state. So for us in Enbridge, we did start by focusing on ourselves and trying to get ourselves to a reasonable state in cybersecurity. And then what we realized is that was not adequate because the threat could come in from a trusted partner, and we weren't quite strong enough to detect that in every case. So we started to branch out and impose some, very much commercial standards, but impose some stronger statements with our partners. What's also interesting is that the second bullet, small players, there's a lot of great activities done by small companies, and I'm a big believer in small companies. I'm a big believer in agile development. They kind of go together. What I also know is that cybersecurity, to do it very well, and I talked about the economics a bit earlier, to do it well is expensive. And I'd offer you a caution that if you're going to deal with very small supply chain partners, you have to be thoughtful about the resilience of your supply chain, and I think you're all more aware of that than probably I am. But what's also true is you have to be aware of their susceptibility on cybersecurity. It is a little bit expensive to get very, very good at it. You can contract it out, and the services that are provided are also relatively expensive. So what that's causing in industry is that those smaller companies tend to get gobbled up fairly quickly if they have a strong offering. And you want to be very careful, would be my advice, before you kind of build a very strong or deep reliance on a small player in your supply chain. And when you do have an electronic connection with them, you want to be thoughtful about how you monitor that connection. Detection for us is very, very important. I was speaking to Linda earlier. We actually have penetration testing going on right now, and I'm sort of monitoring things as they happen. You don't want to become comfortable, and you also want to be able to work with your partners to be able to test them if you're the dominant player. So if you think you're carrying the biggest risk, and you've got a great relationship with your supply chain partner, you want to do one of two things. You can work with them and their partners to do penetration testing. And this is really about, you can do everything, you can abide by SOC 2, you can actually be doing very well, But security is a game of details, and it's a game of if a mistake is made, even if you had a great design, you had a great architecture, you signed up with the right companies, and the auditors gave you a glowing pass, one mistake of a configuration on a server or on a firewall can allow for that gap that can then cause some problems, right? And I don't want to make it sound extreme, but it can be that bad. And so what we've done is we assume that the prevention is going to fail. And then we go into the detection. And it's really important when you engage with your partners and you think about the supply chain in total. One thing that is very positive today, and I'm sure you've heard about cloud and kind of movement towards cloud and things like that. Some of the strongest cloud providers will give you great visibility into the monitoring that they have on your behalf. So what you want to be able to do is work with your partners to understand and be able to monitor and detect anything that may be happening, and build that into your contracts. Okay, response is, security operations centers are often a big part of response for the larger companies. What's also true is companies will outsource security operations and response, so both detection and response, to strong players if they don't feel they have the ability to do it themselves. There is a real strength to using external partners. We do both. We do it internally and we do it with partners. Some of the stronger companies that provide security services and really do that detect and respond, what they do very, very well is they do it for many, many players, and they'll see threats with one company over here that would be just as applicable to another company that they support. So the larger the players that you go towards, they do charge a fair number of dollars, but what they also bring with that is the knowledge that they're watching attacks on thousands of companies versus just your one company. So I am a big believer in using, another dimension of your supply chain, but one of the service providers that you use should be cybersecurity. Even if you think you can do it yourself, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think, we have a fairly strong and robust cybersecurity staff ourselves, but we also rely on partners because they bring a broader view of what cybersecurity is all about. Okay, I've had no questions, so I'm going to create some questions now. Earlier I spoke about patching your systems. One of the most challenging activities that we've run into in Enbridge, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about a couple of the very specific challenges we've had on supply chain in Enbridge. We have, in an oil pipeline, you have a number of control systems that basically move oil, and it's also true for the gas pipelines, and those systems are expensive, and in some cases they're relatively dated. So when you put a pipeline in place, pipelines generally will stay in place for many, many decades, in some cases over 100 years. And so we try and build them to last, and what's also true is the control systems that are associated with that will also often be as many as 20 years old. So if you're thinking about the computers that you buy, every 3 to 4 years, sometimes 2 years, Windows or Microsoft will come out with a new operating system. In the case of Enbridge, we're not able to apply that operating system to the control systems every time. So we fall fairly quickly out of date in terms of our ability to patch once we roll things out into the field. So for us, that's a major challenge. And what we've done is we've turned towards other options associated with prevention because we're not able to patch. What we're doing today is we're working with some of the partners that we have on the control side to basically orchestrate and build security into the products much better such that they can evolve consistent with the evolution of threats going forward. So we're kind of looking forward, assuming threats are going to get worse, the world is going to get to a worse place from a cybersecurity perspective fairly quickly, and we're trying to basically bake security into systems that were not designed with security in mind. When I think about systems and companies that have cash registers and points of sale, and some are far more smart than others, a lot of those were not built with security in mind. They just weren't. And they become strong targets for attackers. Okay, questions, thoughts, comments? Must be some. Yep, please.
About the careful with the small players, and this is something I'm really curious in all levels of the supply chain and logistics. There's going to be probably 25% of the small players who just don't have that cash flow. And they're going to be required in everybody's sort of line. You're the guys, those companies, that threshold, have that capacity to assist or get them into that play. Do you see that going to be an issue, or is that considered in terms of the larger players that have that capacity to buy that protection, while you know that you're pushing out people that just cannot either financially or logically understand or get to that level?
Yeah, I absolutely recognize that the smaller companies, and especially the small mid-sized companies as they grow, they just don't have the ability to direct the kind of funds that a larger company would have as it goes along. I think one of the things that we take quite seriously, and I'm part of a number of organizations that try and drive cybersecurity improvements, is if I can force Microsoft to be more secure in how they build their products, all companies will benefit from that. And I believe that a lot of the companies that do provide cybersecurity protection recognize that many can't afford to do it. So they sort of take the advantage of the big players who push the advances. What I do believe is that some of the more significant security companies, the Herjavaks, Deloitte's a big player on this, RSA, there's a bunch of very, very niche but large security companies. They are more inclined now to have conversations with small companies and come to reasonable terms, because what they've realized is society in general, but definitely the fabric, like we're so connected as an organization that a weakness even in a small company won't just hurt that small company, it'll hurt many. And so that conversation, I had one yesterday with some gentlemen from Palo Alto, and they're a firewall company, security appliance company. And what they've done is they sit on the U.S. panel that advises the president on security, and their push was to make security affordable to the small players by basically having the small players maybe not pay their share, but pay what they can afford to allow the protection to exist. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I do believe it's, things are being done to try and make it more affordable.
Wait till he turns it on for you.
So how do you catch the bad guys?
It's really hard. So, yeah, the three-letter agencies, the FBI, the CIA, in Canada, CSE and CSIS. I worked in CSE for 2 years. That was one of the backgrounds that I had before I decided to get out of government and make a bit of money, which is barely letting me keep my kids in university. But what I find is, first of all, there's a whole government organization that is behind companies to assist in watching, and you won't know they're there very candidly, and it feels kind of Big Brother-ish because they will watch some of the major traffic flows that come in and out of countries and between organizations. But candidly, I'm happy they're there. And for those who are strong privacy believers, I am one as well, but I'm also not about privacy to the detriment of security, right? So there's a real balance there. But the three-letter agencies and the police agencies are really quite strong in chasing as far as they can. If the threat was manifested in a country that respects the laws of the globe, then there's a very good chance that over time that person will get caught. And there are many, many examples of this, especially in the US and Canada. What we find is that once you get into areas that are less interested, some of the attacks that come from Korea, some dimensions of China, some dimensions of Russia, it can become much more challenging. So even if you can figure out where the attack is coming from, it becomes quite challenging to be able to actually do anything meaningful. One of the very interesting documents that was produced lately it was signed off by President Trump. I won't make my political comments here. I don't know who's in the audience, so it's always dangerous. But one of the very positive things that President Trump did was he signed off an executive order on cybersecurity, and specifically it calls out the ability for companies to begin to create offensive capability on cybersecurity. So what this means is if you know you're being attacked and the attacker, and there's often these breadcrumb trails through various anonymous flows, and a really good cybersecurity expert can kind of track that back to an extent, but it'll take a little while. They have the ability, or we're being encouraged now from the government to, if you need to defend yourself, you have the ability to do that. So that is one of the areas that we're starting to look at in Enbridge. You know, would you take offensive action against a kid in his basement? Probably not, but the kid in the basement is probably somebody I would turn to, you know, Roger Chafin as the chief of police for Calgary, and he would track that down very quickly. Would we take offensive action against a terrorist organization that sits in the middle of Syria, and we know where that IP is mapped to a great extent? Would we take actions there to try and bring them down ourselves? We probably would. So I think it depends on the size of the organization and what's possible, but I do see movement in government and also in large companies towards almost getting more offensive, because if they're in the wrong jurisdictions, there's very little that really can be done.
And so I'm really curious about what Enbridge is doing around privacy and security awareness training or those sorts of things to stop users from unintentionally hurting themselves or the companies they work for.
So first of all, I fully agree with that statement that you know, people in the world of cybersecurity, people are often the weakest link. That is absolutely true. You know, there's a couple of very simple rules. I'll tell a story, I think, but let me get the rules out first because I'm going to forget them. You know, the first one is be careful when you're going through your email about what links you follow, right? So phishing, I'm sure everybody in the room has at least heard of the term phishing. But you know, it's a very simple thing. Somebody sends you an email, it's got a link in it. That link connects you to an external server, which is manned by an attacker. Or there's an attachment that's malicious. You know, you follow the link, you click on the attachment, and it finds a vulnerability on your machine and then installs itself, and the world gets very, very unhappy very quickly. We take in Enbridge, we take in about 5 or 6 of those. So we're faced with hundreds of thousands of those every month, and we end up taking in 5 or 6 of them get through our defenses to the point where somebody clicks on the link. And what we do is education all the time, so very serious about education and how we do that. And you know, I'll talk about how long do you educate if somebody's really just constantly clicks on these links all the time. What do you do about that? That's another conversation. That's more of a, I'm not sure that person can be helped. But to date, I don't think we fired anybody for doing that kind of stuff. What's also true, though, is we've got a whole collection of systems that watch to see if that happens. And we've educated people to say, first of all, no shame. If you click on it and something happened that you did not expect, we've got buttons they can push to say, whoops, I think I did something wrong. Right, so that alerts the Security Operations Center, and they can basically contain the damage very, very quickly. You know, we had I talked about penetration testing. We had some penetration testing going on the last few days, and the penetration testers were good, and they ended up hitting, I think, 1,400 different people in our company. We're somewhere around 16,000 people right now. They ended up hitting 1,400 people with this phishing attack. One person clicked on the link, followed it to a website, typed in their password because they thought, and it was a very well-created website. It had the Enbridge brand and logo. It looked very much like an Enbridge site, and they put in their credentials. They hit submit. Thank you very much. The site basically directed them back into the Enbridge fold. They never knew what happened. And so that allowed the attacker to come through, I'll call it a couple of weaknesses that we had, and establish a base and then exploit from there. Now, fortunately, it was us hiring those people to do it against us, so it worked out very well. But you know, we're 16,000 people, and the weakness or a mistake from one person can create that gap, which allows for that activity to take place. So one of the, just to circle back on the things that I do to personally watch myself, training, as a company, we test, we end up having follow-up conversations. If a person does it in the test 3 times repetitively, we'll have a more elevated level of training for that person. And then eventually it becomes a performance conversation. right? Because in today's era, you have to work on a computer. And if you're pretty quick to click on links, you've got to change that behavior. What I tell people on a personal level that I do is I'll take in, I don't know, Linda, how many you get, but I get probably 500 email a day, in that range anyway. And, you know, out of that number of email, I can tell you I click on a link on maybe 2, because it's a link that I know is true, right? So you have to be, you have to be thoughtful about going through your email and take the time to really understand what you're looking at, or just delete it, right? If you delete it, you're safe, right? So in my case, what I tell people is if it's really important, it'll come back, and certainly true in my world. Hopefully that's enough. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a couple I have a comment and a couple questions, and I've saved them all up. First comment is to the point of the smaller companies being pushed out by the larger companies and the technology and requiring to have the technology and the security and stuff. I feel like there is a real advantage of using some of the smaller companies for their agility and their responsiveness and some of the things that they can do. And perhaps as supply chain leaders, we can look at alternatives and solutions to include them in our supply chain at the same time as being secure in our own practices. And yeah.
I'll comment on that because I
Okay.
don't disagree with you actually. Yeah.
Okay. My question, I'm looking for a clarification. Did you say that Enbridge would take action towards a terrorist organization that's infiltrated Enbridge? And I'm just a little bit mind blown about how that would look and how that would work. And my third question is a little bit more personal. Do you own a credit card, and are you selective of where you use it?
So maybe I'll start with the last one because that's probably the easiest one. Yes, you know, I married my wife 25 years ago and she loves credit cards. But anyway, no negative comment there. But yes, so if you live, I think, in society, you have to. And there's almost no way around it. But I can tell you I'm very thoughtful. So I have a credit card that I only use on the web. Okay, and if you haven't done this, do this. So you should have one credit card that you only use for online purchases, nothing else. Watch it like a hawk, okay? Then there's a credit card, I have 3. Then there's a credit card that I use for, I'll call them trusted locations. Home Depot, even though Home Depot had a breach. Target had a breach. But basically organizations that you have some confidence in that, you know, they're probably gonna look after your information fairly well. And then I've got one that if you pop into a convenience store and you've got to buy something quickly, I've got a third credit card, and then I've got a company card that I use. So that tells you how I manage my risk personally. The comment about offensive, your second item, which is, you know, offensive activity and how would that be perceived? We're just starting to have thought about that. Today, what we would do, and we do take the terrorist threat quite seriously, the disruption threat quite seriously. We work with government agencies. So we have not put in place yet the ability to do a giant denial of service attack against an attacker, but the government agencies absolutely have that ability. So for us, I'm not sure, we're still investigating, I'm not sure that we would stand up a formal capability, but I would pick up a phone very quickly to have friends from the past or formal organizations do it on our behalf. So I think that's how we would handle it. Your first comment about small companies, you're not wrong, and nothing is black and white, they're gray. So, you know, the world is very gray. The world I live in anyway is very gray. But what is true about a small company, so here's you know, I think if I was gonna run a company of 5 or 10 people and provide a service, one, I guarantee my machines would be patched up. I guarantee it. I guarantee that there'd be a lot of things well done, and I guarantee I wouldn't spend a lot of money on it, actually. So I think you can choose, and it is easier to secure a company of 5 people than it is to secure a company of 500, because the company of 500 is probably going to face a targeted attack. The company of 5, you might get random attacks because they're just attacking everybody, but you're unlikely to get a targeted attack. Okay, so what happens is the bigger you get, the more attractive you are for an attacker, because there's a better chance of them, you know, getting rewards. University of Calgary was a great example. big, relatively soft target because of the nature of kind of how universities run. So guess what? You know, universities are a huge target all the time. Tiny little college in the middle of, you know, Kentucky or something, much less of a chance of that happening. In a mom and pop shop of 2 or 3 people doing consulting work, you know, I think your threat environment is really much narrower, right? But I am still, as a big buyer of organizations, SOC 2 report I talked about, and which really means getting in their shorts a little bit to see how they do things. And if you're comfortable they do it, it can be cheaper and easier to do on a small scale. Maybe one more? I'm getting the poll here. Yeah.
With the need to share information in supply chain and in transportation, whether it be with first responders, so if there's hazardous goods moving by truck rail, so that they're prepared, as well as through the supply chain to have that just-in-time information so that you can manage your inventory, reduce costs. How do you balance that need to share that information with the need to keep the information safe from an attack or someone who would do something with it that might have other implications?
Yeah, the answer is it's really hard. So, I wrote a paper years ago in, it's called Crosstalk is the name of the magazine, and what it was really about is exactly that topic. So how do you have a duty to share, in that time I was in the military, we have a duty to share with the countries we work with in NATO. We also have the need to keep our tightest information to ourselves and very carefully protected. For organizations to be effective, you're going to have to share a lot of information, absolutely. What I believe is be thoughtful. So in Enbridge, we've got a standard that we use, you know, that basically grades information from public all the way through to restricted as our highest level. And we're fairly careful. Now, we're not as good as we need to be, and I think we're improving all the time, but we're fairly careful when you get down to that more sensitive information. We have a lot more controls on how it's managed and how it's used. So I think it starts with understanding what's sensitive and what's not sensitive. That's kind of step one. Then for the things that truly are sensitive, you know, you want to increase the controls you have on that, and you want to be more thoughtful about how many people have their hands on it, right? But there is not an easy answer there. It's a lot of hard work.